How does a banana trigger a CIA-backed coup? Do AirPods herald the arrival of a new global order? What do LED lights say about the future of humanity? I'm Ed Conway, and in each episode of my new podcast, Stuff Matters, I take an object, crack it open, and reveal the world-shaping forces hidden inside. This is economics told through the things we think we understand. Search Stuff Matters on your podcast app to listen and follow.
Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Wednesday, July the 15th, and today is Keir Starmer's last cabinet meeting, but his last Prime Minister's questions too. To mark all of those last times, he will be presented in cabinet with an engraved carriage clock. Now, what do you give a man who 2 years ago you whooped into power as colleagues only to send him on his way? Let's hope the match against Argentina goes Starmer's and England's way later. Football can be the best medicine. My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. Yeah, the carriage clock feels just a little bit bleak, doesn't it? David Lammy is responsible for the whip round in order to fund it, according to Patrick Maguire of The Times. There's something so depressing. Not only is it just a carriage clock, but also the online donation page where cabinet ministers could put in their credit card details and presumably see how much each of them gave, looking at you, Shabana. That page was also open to the public briefly. Not that I'm necessarily sure that anybody dips in their pocket to help. What do you think this last cabinet meeting will feel like, Anne?
Love the idea that briefly it looked like they were crowdfunding. Anyway, it does feel like one of those leaving dues, this cabinet meeting imminently this morning, where the main figure is going to thank some of you for the good times, and HR are watching nervously. From 8:45, Keir Starmer is in a room with people he knows. In the end, Sam didn't shore up his premiership when he said he wanted to stand and fight. They'll praise his efforts, of course. He'll be clapped out of the room. And he does have the Légion d'honneur from Emmanuel Macron that he received with great pomp yesterday, and genuine warmth in a farewell from Volodymyr Zelensky. He can have all of that on his mantelpiece. It's interesting what tone Kemi Badenoch will strike at PMQs. Is it a day, perhaps, for the softer side of KB?
The what? The softer side of KB? I think not. I don't think Kemi Badenoch does softer sides. I just think it's perhaps not in her nature, but we'll see. I mean, let's watch.
A little grace note might not go amiss.
It might not, but it doesn't feel very in character. But I mean, it's a moment where she can maybe show a different gear. There was a slightly surreal moment, I thought, in the Commons yesterday, because it was the first time we properly heard from Andy Burnham since being re-elected. And he was up speaking on his feet about the Hillsborough law debate, which passed its Commons stages. But he also had his own tribute to the Prime Minister, and I'm sure we'll get lots of these in the coming days. But let's just hear a tiny bit of what he had to say.
It truly is a rewiring of the state and a passing of power from the authorities to the hands of ordinary people. Yeah. And it is happening because of the Prime Minister's commitment to a country based on justice and fairness, and we thank him for that. Yeah.
I was struck, Anne, not only by the fact he wore a suit and tie, but also that he did just seem that touch nervous. There was a sort of slight intake of breath as you sort of watched him just find his feet in how he was speaking, and somebody around me said, "God, they've got this far. He better be good at it." And so we do have a unroad tested Prime Minister in some senses about to hit number 10, and I think collectively the Labour Party is hoping that they picked a good choice.
Yeah, remember also, it is daunting to come back into the Commons. I think we sometimes forget in all of this that for Andy Burnham personally, of course, is what he wanted. It's a great triumph for him to be able to come back as he has done, but he's just been away for a long time. And I'm guessing, and I think you're right to pick up that slight intake of breath, that slight hesitation in his voice, that this is a very difficult period for him too. I mean, Hillsborough start matters immensely to him. He's campaigned on it very intentionally, but he's in a world where he's sort of thanking Keir Starmer, who he set out to replace and has done, and he's speaking there as someone who is like a campaigner who wants to say, I've got my way and this is a great thing and thank you, Prime Minister. And then he's going to be the Prime Minister. And I imagine in his head that was quite a lot of electric static there. Now, yesterday, Sam, you mentioned on the podcast in passing that you had heard Ed Miliband was less likely to be alongside Andy Burnham in this new era as his Chancellor, the most important call that he has to make on his appointments. And essentially, I think we were both hearing that Burnham had been initially minded to go with Ed, or so at least was a lot of the expectation that he was going to be the number 11 neighbour, but that he'd then been dissuaded after soundings about what that would signal about the Burnham position on the political economy, where he wants to position himself more broadly. Well, the Times took up that theme with a vengeance this morning, the front page story, saying that a number of figures around the incoming Prime Minister were suggesting it would definitely not be Ed heading to number 11, and Shabana Mahmood is back in the frame there. So even if no final decision has been taken and we are down to a few days of countdown, it's a very key issue not to have a settled view on, isn't it?
Yeah, let's start with that point, because I think that's a really good one. I mean, it's quite something that there is no formal position on this question this late. It's Wednesday. Andy Burnham becomes Prime Minister on Monday. And the official response from the Burnham camp to this story is no final decisions have been taken. And do you know what, Anne? I kind of can believe that. Normally that's a holding line, but it does feel like with so much else and what I'm hearing kind of via the civil service as well is so much else has not been decided, that there are quite some worries about the kind of speed and level of decision making that we quite possibly are behind where we ought to be on all of this. We've long said on this podcast that some around Andy Burnham, like Louise Haigh, think that the top of cabinet needs to be balanced. This can't be, for instance, the soft left project. And if Ed Miliband had gone in, Andy Burnham's probably from the soft left, Ed Miliband's probably from the soft left. That might be a bit seen as a bit factional, a bit unbalanced. And Lou Haigh had been suggesting that she wasn't keen on that approach. She thinks that you need to have a cabinet that reflects all the wings of the Labour Party. And of course, as this process has gone on, she's got more and more and more important, probably the most central person alongside James Pennell at Andy Burnham's side. So all of that has been quite, I think, tricky for Ed Miliband. But his allies dispute that analysis altogether and say, look, if Andy Burnham wants to do radical stuff, he needs somebody like-minded in the building next door in order to push through his views. And if you go for Shabana Mahmood or Pat McFadden or the like, then the radical rewiring on the state gets harder and you don't get to do anything big and bold early on. The hint that it's not Miliband has been rattling around for a few days now, but with that Time story, it sort of hit the mainstream last night. And it was fascinating. It felt to me like the kind of blue touch paper had been lit at that moment. Political friends of Ed Miliband were immediately in touch with me, saying only he had the experience and the economic background to push through what Burnham wanted, and saying that he had the backing of the Parliamentary Labour Party to get this through. So apart from anything else, the question of how little is settled, and also the reality that by a week today, Andy Burnham's going to have upset a lot of people, whatever he does with a lot of choices. The rubber's about to hit the road.
Feels like that, doesn't it? And it does sound like there could still be some fight back there from Ed Miliband, I think, which we're on a day-by-day check-in, really. And that is a little bit of a problem in that mood of being unsettled is going to have to change quite quickly if Burnham's early days in power are going to feel like he knows where he wants to head. I suppose you can say that this is a kind of interstitial week and there's going to be quite a lot of fuss and fizz about who's going to get the big jobs. I also got a few soundings from allies of Shabana Mahmood, who was saying until very recently how keen she was to stay at the Home Office till she could nail on successes on the small boats, on immigration stats, etc. But in the end, is she really going to turn down the offer of being Chancellor and being so closely intertwined with the Burnham project? That's quite a hard offer to turn down. I was at a very Blairite gathering that we referred to on the podcast earlier this week and asked a former minister whether potentially having David Miliband return as Foreign Secretary, as very heavily rumoured. I also heard there were serious talks, if not absolutely conclusive, but serious talks about that between Miliband and Burnham. Did that mean that you couldn't, in the end, it would just be two Cohen brothers to end up also having Ed Miliband as Chancellor? And this person simply raised their glass and said, win-win. And it reminded me that you cannot really get rid of that old tension as much as you might want to move on, say this is an entirely new era. There is still that sense, people choose a side between the left or the leftish and the rightish of Labour when it comes to key appointments. And we don't have confirmation that David Miliband is heading to King Charles Street, but those talks have been happening. Seriously, could it be that that's another reason why, in the end, Ed Miliband is going to have to take another role?
Just on a point of fact, I don't think you can get a more Blairite gathering than the summer party of the Tony Blair Institute.
Busted.
But also, just the way that you put that sort of brings me back to this sort of growing feeling that we are entering a period of what feels like quite intense factionalism in the Labour Party, whether it's people referring to each other as being from the soft left, worried about questions of balance. The whole Burnham project risks, and I think this is one of the biggest risks for them, just being seen as a set of people who were rejected by Keir Starmer, now sort of getting their revenge. I think if it ends up going badly, that's the starting point that will be remembered. But of course, there are genuine issues at play here over the chancellorship. If Andy Burnham goes for Ed Miliband in number 11, city business, the markets, in quite a lot of cases, are just going to be pretty unimpressed, fairly or unfairly. They have a view of him based on the last 15 years of his political background, on predators versus producers and his approach to capitalism. The interesting thing about that, though, Anne, is of course, Ed Miliband and his allies knew this. They know this. They've been talking to me about this. And they had a plan to address it, which was a sort of, if he got the chancellorship, there was a sort of mini grid of things that they could do to impress the markets and make it clear that he was, somebody who had a plan, believed in fiscal responsibility and all the like. They had a plan to address this, and they still do. But the question I was picking up last night from people on the sort of fringes of the Burnham project was, why didn't you roll that out already? If you are fiscally responsible, if you do have a side that is more business friendly, why have you been waiting to sort of show that in the public domain and sort of letting all of this percolate without addressing it? Why wait until you get the job to fix the problem rather than do a bit of pitch rolling? There was some bafflement that for instance, he didn't get more market figures to vouch for his fiscal credibility. Why not get ahead of all the problems that are being thrown and obstacles that are being cited as why you can't have the job that you want?
Doesn't that remind us of the fundamental rule of what's happened in the Labour Party in the last few weeks and couple of months, which is the Mike Tyson one, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face? Because that is really... Exactly. Oh yeah, I had a plan for that. Well, yeah. So doesn't it also go to the heart of the big question? And in a way, you're shining the light on it, and it applies pretty much everywhere in the appointments that Andy Burnham is going to make. Is this essentially a soft left shift, as many of his backers originally wanted, when they talk about being bold, which is sort of Labour code for moving a bit to the left and doing things that are more kind of status than private sector? Is that what's happening here? Or is this more like a government of all the talents kind of model, where you reshuffle and you balance out and you try to avoid accusations that you've gone all lefty? And at the same time, then people will say, well, please, just tell us where you stand and what your own positioning is. One confirmed move we have had is that the guy who kicked all of this off, the former Makerfield MP, Josh Simons, who handed that seat essentially to Andy Burnham, has issued a statement saying he isn't going to go into government in a backroom role. He's working on policy transition. He said he wants a breather after Monday, after a little bit too much excitement that he caused one way and the other, Josh. And it's quite interesting there that some people also may be seeing that their best interests are served by not trying to get straight into this a cauldron, but being available, if you like, to the Prime Minister as things unfold. The other figure clearly looking for a big job, I mean, kind of always looking for a big job, really, is Wes Streeting, who still keeps his sense of humour because he posted a picture of himself last night in front of a hoarding advertising retirement planning at the New Statesman party and saying things don't always turn out as you planned. The Mike Tyson rule.
But planning he is. I noticed he was 3 along from Andy Burnham in the Commons, and then later in the evening, I think he was giving a speech to the New Statesman summer party. So he's doing everything he can. Right, let's turn to foreign policy. Now, before we talk about Andy Burnham's foreign policy, just one note on something that was causing white-hot fury in government last night. The charity Save the Children did a social media post on X with a picture of a blue commemorative plaque with "History will not forget complicity," naming Keir Starmer for witnessing the killing in their language of 73,000 Palestinians. And I was at this by somebody in government. They were pretty upset at this, pointing out the Prime Minister is the one that, recognise the state of Palestine has moved on this issue, but also saying that at a time where counter-terror police are investigating the killing of a politician, they thought it was pretty disgusting for a charity to operate like this in a democracy. One person's kind of making a point is another person's kind of vile attack. I was quite struck by it. It's like jars with the traditional image of Save the Children, I thought.
But it does remind me also that Andy Burnham's biggest foreign policy move so far has been to say that the Starmer government got things wrong on Gaza. I mean, he did lean into that, lent into that criticism across the party, particularly on the left, and those who think that's one reason they're losing ground to the Greens and others. So that topic, one way or the other, is going to come back in the early days of the Burnham premiership.
That's actually an issue that I've been looking at as part of a film about looking at Andy Burnham and foreign policy. What's he going to do about it? Part of the 3-part series I've been doing with producer Joe Cook. It's out all day today on Sky and on YouTube. Just on that subject of Gaza, listen how it's gone down with Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Emily Thornberry.
I think it's important to come in and take a harder line. Because if you come in now as leader and you look now at what is going on, we've recognised Palestine, but there are people in this far-right Israeli government whose their ambition is simply to snuff out Palestine, and they say it.
But of course, that comes with trade-offs. Here's the Sky analyst Michael Clark about the implications.
It will make his life harder with the United States. It makes his life harder with the MAGA Republican group in the US. But I think he decided that seeming to dither, seeming not to take a stand, was actually more dangerous than taking a stand.
And there we have it. Listening to Michael Clark, your excellent colleague's analysis there, it just reminds us that there are not these choices are not as simple as they might appear when people say you pull yourself away from the US because a lot of people in the centre and left of centre don't like Donald Trump, so just move a little bit away from that. Well, there are absolute trade-offs there in terms of what happens there when you go seeking tariff relief, or when you're in an international crisis, do you want to have that hotline relationship, however bruising it may be? Do you want to have it with Donald Trump or don't you? It's not as simple, I think, as a kind of Burnham-esque or views that I've heard, I'm sure you have, because you reflected it in the film, of like, well, we'll just move a little bit away from where Keir Starmer was and things will get better. And we've just briefly discussed the choices there on Gaza as well. I think it's probably fine in Labour terms to say you want to be a bit more critical of Israel and Israel's conduct and the fact that the war in Iran strongly embraced or indeed pushed by Netanyahu as Prime Minister, that it hasn't worked out too well. But the choices still come rushing at you. And that's why it matters an awful lot who is Foreign Secretary to Burnham, because I think he's also making clear that he doesn't want to be abroad as much as Keir Starmer was. But people will still ask the same questions. What does your government stand for and what does it oppose?
Yeah, doing these films, and particularly this foreign policy one, has been really enlightening because it just reminds you that hard choices are unavoidable and coming at you really, really quickly. Whether it was the outgoing EU ambassador to London talking about the summit in the autumn and the fact that actually the UK, the tariffs imposed by the EU on UK steel are up for discussion, could be up for discussion, or Al Khan's telling me that defence spending needs to be sorted really soon. But the thing that struck me most, Anne, about foreign policy and Andy Burnham is that his Makerfield test for policy in general could have some, if he does follow through with it, some really, really significant kind of outcomes for foreign policy. I was talking to a really smart ex-official called Dr. Rolly Asthana, who's now at Chatham House. And she says that if Andy Burnham holds true to what he says about the Makerfield test in foreign policy, that is quite a big change because it means moving away from grand gestures and moral and symbolic leadership of the sort that we saw even from Keir Starmer on climate change and on human rights, and a greater focus on the cost of living, energy prices, wealth creation. Now, Keir Starmer paid a lot of lip service to sorting out stuff abroad in order to help the cost of living at home, but also went to COP summits and signed up to big grand international projets. And she's saying that if you are more upfront about the trade-offs and you actually engage in the trade-offs, then you could see help for people more at home by altering foreign policy away from where it has been over the last few years.
Well, yes, but I'm afraid I am a bit yes, but about this. So just very briefly, if you look at something like the Jaguar Land Rover test, right? How were those jobs saved at our major luxury British car exporter, where the vast majority of its exports, particularly given the global trade climate, which is getting more closed, not more open, got a tariff relief on 100,000 exports. Actually, with a lot of credit to Keir Starmer and to his, now perhaps somewhat maligned former Chief of Staff Morgan McSweeney. But the way that happened was by triaging relationship with Donald Trump, a bit of pathos, a bit of the special relationship, so-called, and actually, in the end, that prevented redundancy notices going out to those workers. So it's not as, I think sometimes saying you want to retreat from it and that will allow you to focus on cost of living and actual outcomes for workers is the other way around. Maybe you do have to do some of the sucky up stuff in order to get a bit of relief, particularly in this climate where we have Donald Trump in the White House. So there we go. There's one lesson from the recent past presents itself perhaps to foreign policy. But excellent film, gives us a deep dive on of so many challenges that are facing Andy Burnham abroad as well as at home.
Redundancy notice is what will be handed by our listeners if we go on much more over our 20 minutes. So let's wrap it up. Big Dev Theatre in Westminster. I'm staying out of it, watching my daughter's performance in Alice in Wonderland. We will see you soon.
Good luck for her with her performance. And it's a bit Lewis Carroll at Westminster at the moment anyway, isn't it? I don't know if you'll be able to tell the difference.
How does a banana trigger a CIA-backed coup? Do AirPods herald the arrival of a new global order? What do LED lights say about the future of humanity? I'm Ed Conway, and in each episode of my new podcast, Stuff Matters, I take an object, crack it open, and reveal the world-shaping forces hidden inside. This is economics told through the things we think we understand. Search Stuff Matters on your podcast app to listen and follow.